My name is Madison Hayes, and I'm 27 years old now, looking back on birthdays that never quite felt like celebrations. Growing up in our spacious suburban home, my parents always had the same answer when I asked for a party: we just can't afford it. Maddie, it became a mantra I accepted, even as I watched countless other children blow out candles in our backyard, their laughter drifting up to my bedroom window where I sat alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even as a child, how could we afford to host everyone else's special day but mine? Before I share how I discovered the painful truth about my birthdays, let me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, and join me as I unravel this childhood mystery that shaped who I am today. My earliest birthday memory is from when I turned 5. I remember waking up that morning with the excited butterflies that only a child on their birthday can feel. I bounded down our carpeted staircase, my small hand sliding along the polished wooden banister, expecting something: balloons maybe, a special breakfast, the kind of magic I'd seen in movies or at friends' houses. Instead, my parents were sitting at our kitchen table, my father reading the newspaper and my mother sipping coffee. They looked up when I entered, and Mom smiled, saying, "Happy birthday, Maddie." Dad nodded and returned to his paper. That evening after dinner, Mom placed a single grocery store cupcake in front of me with one candle. "Make a wish, sweetheart," she said as she snapped a quick photo. I remember closing my eyes and wishing for a real party next year. Dad handed me a small wrapped package, a coloring book, and crayons. "We can't afford a big celebration this year," Mom explained, patting my head. "Maybe when we're doing better financially." Our house was a spacious 4-bedroom colonial in a nice neighborhood. We had a large fenced backyard with an in-ground pool, a deck, and a patio area. It wasn't a mansion, but it was certainly more than comfortable. Even at 5, something didn't add up, but I couldn't articulate what it was. 2 years later, I discovered what our house was really used for. One Saturday afternoon in June, I heard music and laughter coming from our backyard. Curious, I peered out my bedroom window and saw our backyard transformed. There was a large pink and purple bouncy castle where I normally played. Streamers hung from the trees. A woman dressed as a princess was entertaining about 20 children. A banner read, "Happy 7th birthday, Sophia." I ran downstairs, excited by the festivities, only to have my mother intercept me at the back door. "Madison, please go back to your room," she whispered urgently. "You can't join the party." "But whose party is it?" I asked, confused. "The Johnsons rented our house for their daughter's birthday," she explained. "We need the extra income, so please don't disturb them. I'll bring you a slice of cake later." I watched the entire party from my window, the games, the presents, the professional photographer capturing every moment. I saw my dad manning the grill, smiling wider than he did at home. My mother was arranging platters of food, chatting with the other parents. They looked like different people, engaged, enthusiastic, present. Later that evening, as promised, my mother brought me a slice of leftover cake. "Why can other kids have parties at our house but I can't?" I asked. Dad overheard and sat down on the edge of my bed. "The Johnsons paid us to use our house, Maddie. That money helps us pay bills. Your birthday parties would cost us money instead of bringing it in. You understand, right? We're just not in a position to spend like that." I nodded, because that's what good children do. But inside, a small voice was asking why the money always mattered more than making me happy. As I grew older, I began to notice a pattern. Our house hosted birthday parties, graduation celebrations, baby showers, and even small weddings. Each time I was asked to stay in my room or go to a friend's house. Each time our backyard or living room was transformed for someone else's special day. My birthdays remained small affairs: a homemade cake if I was lucky, a modest gift, and perhaps a movie rental. My 8th birthday brought me a set of colored pencils. My 9th, a second-hand bike that Dad fixed up. My 10th, a trip to the local ice cream shop with my one close friend, Rebecca. Each year my parents would remind me, "We're keeping it simple this year, honey. Money's tight." Meanwhile, I watched as our yard became a dinosaur excavation site, complete with buried fossils for a boy named Ethan. I saw it transformed into a carnival with cotton candy machines and a small Ferris wheel for twins named Emma and Ethan. I observed a Hawaiian luau with professional fire dancers for a girl's sweet 16. And a winter wonderland with artificial snow in July for a Christmas-obsessed child. Each of these events featured elaborate decorations, catered food, hired entertainment, and every detail meticulously planned. I would catch glimpses of my parents orchestrating these magical days, my father joking with the party guests, my mother arranging beautiful centerpiece she'd crafted herself. They seemed so involved, so invested in making these celebrations perfect. After one particularly elaborate unicorn-themed party for a 9-year-old neighbor, I found my mother cleaning up in the kitchen. "That looked like fun," I said carefully, helping her load the dishwasher. "The Patels paid extra for the unicorn decorations," she replied. "It was a lot of work, but they seemed happy with everything." "How much do people pay to have parties here?" I asked innocently. She paused, seeming uncomfortable. "Enough to help us get by, Madison. Please don't ask about money, it's not polite." But I couldn't help wondering why getting by never included setting aside funds for my celebrations. We lived in a 4-bedroom house with a pool in a good neighborhood. My father worked as an accountant, my mother as a part-time real estate agent. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either, at least not in ways that were visible to me. As each birthday approached, I learned to temper my expectations. I stopped asking for parties because I knew the answer would always be the same. Instead, I pretended not to care, to be more mature than my peers who still wanted celebrations. But deep inside, watching other children experience the magic of a special day in my own home left a wound that grew deeper with each passing year. By the time I turned 11, I had fully internalized the message other children's joy was profitable and therefore valuable. Mine was simply an expense, one that my family couldn't or wouldn't afford. My 13th birthday marked my official entry into teenagehood, and for once I decided to speak up about what I wanted. I had maintained good grades, helped around the house without complaint, and never caused my parents any trouble. Surely I had earned a small celebration. "Mom, Dad," I said one evening about a month before my birthday, "I don't want a big party or anything, but could I maybe have a few friends over for my birthday? Just Rebecca, Hannah, Tyler, Mia, and Aiden. We could just have pizza and watch movies in the basement." My parents exchanged that look, the one I had come to recognize as their silent communication about how to let me down gently. "Madison," my father began, "having even a small group over costs money. There's food, drinks, and you'd probably want decorations. We just don't have the budget for entertaining right now." "But it would just be pizza and sodas," I argued, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "We won't need decorations. It would cost less than $50. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. "We're thinking of your birthday, sweetie. We've already set aside money for a special dinner, just the 3 of us. Isn't that nice?" I nodded and excused myself from the table. As I headed upstairs to my room, I overheard my father on the phone in his office. "Yes, Mrs. Blackwell, we're available that weekend for Chloe's Sweet 16. The premium package includes the full backyard setup, 4 hours of pool access, and basic decorations. With the additional photo booth you mentioned, we're looking at $1,200. We require a $300 deposit to hold the date." I froze on the stairs, my heart pounding. $1,200 for a stranger's daughter, but not $50 for me. I retreated to my room and cried silently into my pillow. On my actual birthday, my parents took me to a chain restaurant where the waitstaff sang an awkward birthday song. My father spent most of dinner checking his phone, finalizing details for Chloe Blackwell's upcoming party. My mother gave me a journal and pen set. "For all your thoughts and dreams," she said. If only she had ever asked what those dreams were. The following Saturday, I watched from my bedroom as Chloe Blackwell's Sweet 16 transformed our backyard. There were twinkling lights strung through the trees, a GD booth, a professional photographer, and a 3-tiered cake that must have cost hundreds of dollars. My mother had spent days preparing handcrafted decorations in Chloe's chosen colors of teal and silver. My father had rented extra chairs, tables, and a dance floor. Rebecca, my closest friend since elementary school, knew about my situation. She had long ago stopped asking why we never celebrated at my house. Instead, she created alternative celebrations for me. On my 13th birthday, she had brought cupcakes to school and convinced our small group of friends to sing to me at lunch. It was a small gesture that meant more than she could know. "It's weird that your parents do this," she commented once while sleeping over. We could hear a graduation party happening in the backyard. Don't they realize how it makes you feel? I shrugged, pretending indifference. It's just business to them. But Rebecca saw through my facade. It's okay to be upset about it, Madison. By 14, I had perfected the art of downplaying my birthday. When classmates asked about my plans, I would casually respond, "Oh, I don't really care about birthdays. They're kind of childish, don't you think?" It was easier than admitting the truth that my birthday highlighted my place in the family hierarchy, somewhere below additional income. The worst incident happened when I was 15. I had been sent home early from school with a mild fever. No one expected me home, and I entered quietly through the front door, planning to go straight to bed. I stopped short when I saw my parents in the living room. They were enthusiastically hanging decorations for what appeared to be a space-themed party. My mother was carefully placing star-shaped confetti on tables while my father assembled what looked like a small planetarium projector. "This is going to be perfect," my mother was saying, her face animated with excitement I rarely saw at home. "Little Jacob is going to love it." "The rocket ship cake should be delivered by 4, my father added, consulting his watch, "and I picked up those special astronaut ice cream sandwiches he likes." I stood there watching them fuss over every detail. For a child I had never met, my mother was placing small handwritten cards with space facts at each place setting. My father was testing the projector, making sure the stars looked realistic on our ceiling. Neither of them had ever shown this level of enthusiasm for any of my birthdays. The contrast was so stark, so painful that I couldn't stay silent. "Why do you do this?" I asked from the doorway, my voice cracking. They both jumped, startled by my presence. "Madison, why aren't you at school?" my mother asked, ignoring my question. "I got sent home sick, but that doesn't matter. Why do you do all this for strangers but nothing for me?" My father's face hardened. "Madison, you know this is how we supplement our income. We've explained this to you many times. But you never even try for my birthdays," I said, tears threatening. "You've never once made me feel special on my birthday. Do you know how it feels to watch you create magical days for everyone else's children but tell me we can't afford even a small party for me?" "You're being ungrateful," my father said sharply. "We provide you with everything you need: a roof over your head, food, clothes, school supplies. Not every child gets a fancy party every year." "I've never had a fancy party in a year," I shot back. "Not once, not even a simple one with just a few friends." My mother stepped in, her voice soothing but dismissive. "Madison, you're upset because you're not feeling well. Why don't you go lie down and we can talk about this later?" But later never came. By evening they were too busy cleaning up from Jacob's successful space adventure to address my outburst. The next day it was as if the conversation had never happened. After that incident, something changed inside me. I stopped hoping for acknowledgement. I stopped dropping hints about my birthday weeks in advance. Instead, I poured myself into academics, where achievement was recognized and rewarded. I maintained a 4.0 GPA, joined the debate team, and focused on building a college application that would take me far away from the house that celebrated everyone but me. The message had been received loud and clear: I wasn't worth celebrating, and over time I began to believe it. At 18, I left for State University with a partial scholarship and a desperate need for distance. Moving into my dorm room, I felt a strange mix of freedom and anxiety. Without the constant reminder of others' celebrations, would I finally feel worthy of taking up space? My roommate, Jasmine Patterson, was everything I wasn't: outgoing, confident, and unabashedly enthusiastic about celebrations of any kind. Within our first week together, she had decorated our door for another hallmate's birthday and organized an impromptu pizza party for someone who had aced their first college exam. "You're really into celebrations," I commented one evening watching her craft a homemade card. "Life's too short not to celebrate the good stuff," she replied with a shrug. "Even the small victories deserve recognition, you know." My 19th birthday fell on a Tuesday in October, about 2 months into my freshman year. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone, maintaining my habit of downplaying its importance. I had a morning class, followed by a study group, and planned to spend the evening quietly completing an essay. When I returned to our dorm room that evening, I opened the door to find Jasmine, along with 5 other students from our floor, standing beside a small cake illuminated with candles. "Surprise!" they shouted in unison. I stood frozen, unsure how to react. How did you know? Jasmine grinned. It was on your driver's license when you showed it to me for the pizza delivery last week. I have a thing for remembering dates. They had decorated our small room with streamers made from colored paper and a handmade banner that read Happy Birthday Madison. The cake was clearly from the campus bakery, nothing fancy, but it had my name on it. We don't really know what you like yet, said Rachel, a quiet girl from down the hall, but everyone deserves a birthday celebration. Something inside me broke open. These people barely knew me, yet they had done more to acknowledge my birthday than my own parents had in years. I burst into tears, causing immediate concern among my new friends. I'm sorry, Jasmine apologized. We didn't mean to upset you. Between sobs, I managed to explain that these were happy tears, that no one had ever surprised me for my birthday before. I didn't tell them the whole story, it was too painful, too embarrassing, but they understood enough to realize the simple gesture meant more than they could know. That evening changed something fundamental for me. As my friendships deepened over the following months, I discovered what it felt like to be valued, to have people make space for me in their lives without calculating the cost. We celebrated each other's achievements, comforted each other through disappointments, and created traditions that bonded us together. When Christmas break arrived, I returned home with new perspective. The house felt different, somehow smaller, less intimidating. My parents seemed surprised by my confidence, my willingness to engage rather than retreat to my room. 3 days before Christmas, I was searching for our holiday decorations in the storage closet when I came across a file box labeled Party Business. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it to find meticulous financial records dating back to when I was 5 years old. What I discovered made me physically ill. The party business had been generating significant income, far more than the helping us get by my parents had always claimed. There were spreadsheets showing profits of $20, 30 annually, separate from my parents' regular income. A separate bank account statement showed a healthy balance that had grown over the years. Most damning of all was a notebook where my mother had jotted party ideas and client notes. On one page, dated near my 12th birthday, she had written Madison asking again about birthday party, suggested bowling with friends, too expensive $150, INs 200 and not worth the return. Scheduled Henderson graduation same weekend $1 800 booking. The truth hit me with stunning clarity. It had never been about not being able to afford my celebrations, it was that they weren't profitable. My special days were measured against potential income and found wanting. Every time they had said, "We can't afford it," what they really meant was, "We prefer the alternative." When my parents returned from last-minute shopping, I confronted them with the records. "Why did you always lie to me?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady as I placed the financial documents on the kitchen table. "You could have afforded small parties for me, you chose not to." My father's face flushed with anger. "You had no right to go through our financial records. You had no right to make me feel worthless my entire childhood," I countered. My mother attempted to defuse the situation. "Madison, you're overreacting. We always celebrated your birthdays with the bare minimum," I said, "while creating magical experiences for strangers' children. Do you know what that did to me? Do you have any idea how it feels to watch your parents put more effort into a stranger's celebration than they ever did for you?" "This business helped pay for your college," my father argued defensively. "No, my scholarship and student loans are paying for my college," I corrected him, "and even if the business did contribute, that doesn't excuse making me feel like I wasn't worth the effort for 18 years. The conversation devolved from there. My parents deflected, minimized, and eventually accused me of being ungrateful for everything they had provided. There was no acknowledgement of the emotional impact their choices had made, no recognition of the harm done. I left the next morning, catching an early bus back to campus. The holiday break wasn't over, but I couldn't bear to spend another day in that house. Jasmine's family welcomed me for the remainder of the break, showing me what a loving family environment could look like. Back at school, I began processing what I'd learned with the help of my new support system. My friends listened without judgment as I unpacked years of feeling unworthy of celebration. "It sounds like it wasn't about money at all," Rachel observed during one late-night conversation. "It was about priorities." But why would parents prioritize strangers over their own child? I asked, still struggling to understand. I don't know, she admitted, but what I do know is that it reflects on them, not on you. You were always worthy of celebration, Madison, always. Those words became a lifeline as I began the difficult process of rebuilding my self-worth from the ground up. 2 years into college, during my junior year, I received an unexpected phone call from my Aunt Elaine, my father's sister. We had never been close. She lived across the country and had a strained relationship with my father. I had met her perhaps 3 times in my life. Madison, she said after brief pleasantries, I heard from your cousin that you're not speaking much with your parents these days. I confirmed this was true, though I didn't elaborate on the reasons. There are things you should know, she continued, hesitation in her voice, things about your family that might help you understand, even if they don't excuse what happened. What she revealed shook the foundation of how I understood my childhood. According to Aunt Elaine, my birth had coincided with a major career setback for my father. He had been on track for a significant promotion, one that would have moved us to a larger city and a more prestigious position. However, complications with my mother's pregnancy led to an extended hospital stay, causing my father to miss crucial meetings and presentations. The promotion went to someone else, Aunt Elaine explained. Your father always believed if he hadn't been distracted by your mother's pregnancy, his career would have taken a different path. So he blamed me? I asked, my throat tight. Not consciously, perhaps, she replied, but Richard has always had a talent for holding grudges. I think he associated your birth with his professional disappointment, and that association stuck even as you grew older. She went on to explain that my mother had suffered from undiagnosed postpartum depression after my birth. While she eventually recovered, the early bonding period had been difficult, creating a distance that was never fully bridged. The party business started when you were about 4, she continued. Initially, it was just a way to make extra money, but I think it became something more for your parents, a way to create perfect celebrations for others when their own family narrative felt imperfect. I spent the following weeks investigating this family history, calling relatives I barely knew, piecing together the story of my early years. Most confirmed Aunt Elaine's account, adding details that painted a clearer picture. My maternal grandmother recalled my mother's struggles after my birth, how she would stare blankly when I cried instead of responding. My father's college friend mentioned his bitter disappointment over the lost promotion, how he had talked about it for years afterward. With this new context, I returned to the financial records I had photographed during my brief Christmas visit. Looking at them now, I noticed something I had missed before: the separate account where party profits were deposited and just been sitting there. Regular withdrawals had funded luxury purchases and vacations, a fishing boat for my father, annual spa retreats for my mother, a timeshare in Florida they visited twice yearly. All while telling me we couldn't afford to celebrate my birthdays. The full weight of this revelation crushed me. It wasn't just that my celebrations weren't profitable, it was that I was associated with disappointment from the very beginning. My birthdays weren't just not worth celebrating, they were reminders of what my parents perceived they had lost because of my existence. I broke down completely in my dorm room, sobbing until my eyes swelled shut. My roommate Jasmine found me there and immediately rallied our friend group. They took shifts staying with me, making sure I ate, helping me get to classes when I felt able. You need to talk to someone professional about this, Jasmine urged gently after a few days. This is heavy stuff, Madison, heavier than we can help you carry alone. She was right. The university offered counseling services, and I made an appointment with Dr. Lindsay Thorne, a therapist specializing in family trauma. In our first session, I could barely articulate the tangled mess of emotions I was experiencing. Take your time, Dr. Thorne said. We're not in a rush. Over the following months, our weekly sessions helped me understand patterns of emotional neglect that had shaped my childhood. Dr. Thorne explained how children often internalize the message that they are somehow responsible for their parents' negative emotions or behaviors. You grew up believing you weren't worth celebrating, she observed, but the truth is that your parents were dealing with their own unresolved issues. Their inability to celebrate you had nothing to do with your worthiness and everything to do with their limitations. We explored the concept of narcissistic parenting, how some parents see their children as extensions of themselves rather than as individuals with their own needs and feelings, how my parents' disappointments had been projected onto me, creating a narrative where I was perpetually indebted to them simply for providing basic necessities. But shouldn't I be grateful? I asked during one session. They did provide for me materially. Providing food, shelter, and clothing isn't exceptional parenting, Madison, Dr. Thorne replied gently. It's the minimum requirement. Children deserve emotional nurturing too, and that includes acknowledgement of important milestones and achievements. Therapy became my lifeline as I worked through years of internalized unworthiness. I learned to recognize the voice in my head that still whispered I wasn't deserving of celebration and to challenge it with evidence from my new relationships, friends who valued me, professors who recognized my academic achievements, a support system that made space for my feelings. The journey wasn't linear. Some days I felt stronger, able to see my parents as flawed humans rather than the architects of my insecurities. Other days, the hurt felt as fresh as when I was 7 years old watching another child's party from my bedroom window. But gradually I began to heal. I established firm boundaries with my parents, limiting contact to occasional phone calls where I maintained emotional distance. I focused on building a life that affirmed my worth rather than questioning it. And I began to understand that while knowing the reasons behind my parents' behavior provided context, it didn't excuse the impact of their choices. Understanding why they failed me didn't make the failure any less real. As my 21st birthday approached during my senior year of college, I made a decision that both terrified and empowered me. It was time to address the issues with my parents directly, not in the heat of discovery as I had during that disastrous Christmas break, but with intentional clarity about what I needed from them moving forward. I planned a weekend visit home, scheduling it 2 weeks before my actual birthday to separate the conversation from any expectations about celebration. I had spent months preparing with Dr. Thorne, role-playing different scenarios, identifying my boundaries, and clarifying what I hoped to achieve. Remember, she cautioned during our final session before the visit, you can't control how they respond. All you can control is how you express yourself and what boundaries you maintain. I arrived on a Friday evening to find the house largely unchanged. The only notable difference was a new scheduling whiteboard in the kitchen, with upcoming party bookings color-coded by type of event. The business was clearly still thriving. My parents greeted me with awkward hugs and surface-level questions about school. We made it through dinner with bland conversation about the weather, my classes, and neighborhood news. Neither mentioned our last interaction or my abrupt departure during Christmas break 2 years earlier. On Saturday morning, I asked them both to sit down with me in the living room. I'd brought a folder containing selected evidence, financial records, the notebook entry about my 12th birthday, statements from the separate account showing withdrawals for luxury purchases. I had also written a letter expressing how their choices had affected me, which I planned to leave with them regardless of how the conversation went. I need to talk to you about something important, I began once we were all seated. My voice was steady despite my racing heart. My father immediately looked defensive. If this is about money for next semester. It's not about money, I interrupted. It's about truth. For years you told me we couldn't afford to celebrate my birthdays while you were creating elaborate celebrations for strangers in our home. I placed the financial records on the coffee table between us. These show that wasn't true. You could afford it, you chose not to, and I need to understand why. My father's face flushed with anger. Going through our financial records was a violation of our privacy. Making your daughter feel worthless for 18 years was a violation of your parental responsibility, I countered, my voice still calm. I'm not here to fight, I'm here to understand. My mother interjected, tears already forming. Madison, we always tried our best. Parenting doesn't come with a handbook. I took a deep breath. Mom, I found your notebook where you specifically wrote that my 12th birthday request wasn't worth the return compared to a graduation party booking. You measured the value of my happiness against profit and found it wanting. That goes beyond parenting mistakes into deliberate choice. I then placed the bank statements showing withdrawals. The money from these parties didn't just pay bills, It funded fishing boats and spa retreats while I was told we couldn't afford a simple pizza party with friends. My parents exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. My father's defensive posture hadn't changed, but something in my mother's expression shifted, a flash of recognition, perhaps even shame. We provided everything you needed, my father insisted. Food and shelter are not everything a child needs, I replied, echoing Dr. Thorne's words. Children need to feel valued, seen, worthy of celebration. The conversation continued in circles, with my father becoming increasingly defensive and my mother alternating between tears and attempts to change the subject. I remained focused, returning to my central questions. Why had they prioritized profit over my happiness? Why had they lied about affordability? Why had they never acknowledged the impact of their choices? After nearly an hour of deflection, something unexpected happened. My father, frustrated by my persistence, finally broke. "You want to know why? Fine, your birth ruined everything," he shouted, standing abruptly. "I was supposed to become regional director. We were supposed to move to Chicago. I had it all planned out until your mother had complications and I had to miss the final interviews. Phillips got the job instead, and I got stuck in middle management for 20 years. The room fell silent after his outburst. My mother looked horrified. I felt strangely calm, as though the final piece of a puzzle had clicked into place. "So you punished me my entire childhood because I had the audacity to be born at an inconvenient time?" I asked quietly. My father seemed suddenly aware of what he had admitted. He sat back down heavily, running his hands over his face. "It wasn't like that," he muttered, but the conviction had left his voice. My mother reached for my hand, which I pulled away. "I should have stood up for you," she whispered. "After the depression lifted, I should have insisted we celebrate you properly, but it was easier to go along with the narrative we'd created. The business was doing well. Your father was happier when we had parties booked, and I just went with it." "Did you ever consider how it made me feel?" I asked. "Watching you transform our home for stranger after stranger while telling me we couldn't afford to acknowledge my birthday?" "We did acknowledge your birthdays," my father argued weakly. "With the minimum effort possible," I corrected. "A grocery store cupcake and a budget gift isn't a celebration, it's an obligation fulfilled." We talked for another hour, moving in incremental steps toward honesty. My father admitted that his resentment had colored his relationship with me from the beginning, though he insisted he had done his best given the circumstances. My mother acknowledged that she had failed to advocate for me, choosing marital peace over my emotional needs. Neither fully accepted responsibility for the harm they had caused. Neither apologized without qualification when they attempted to minimize the impact of their choices or suggest I was overreacting. I stood firm. "I'm not asking you to agree with my feelings," I told them. "I'm telling you what my experience was. Whether you accept that or not, it's my truth." Before leaving, I handed them the letter I had written and a list of boundaries for our relationship moving forward. These included limited contact, no unsolicited advice about my life choices, and an understanding that I would no longer pretend everything was fine for the sake of appearances. "I don't know if we can ever have a healthy relationship," I told them honestly, "but I do know we can't have any relationship without honesty and respect. The choice is yours." I left that afternoon, declining their offer to stay the night. As I drove back to campus, I felt neither triumph nor closure, just a quiet certainty that I had spoken my truth, regardless of whether they were ready to hear it. 3 months passed with no contact from my parents. I focused on finishing my senior year, applying to graduate psychology programs, and strengthening my connections with friends who had become my chosen family. We celebrated each other's victories, supported each other through disappointments, and created traditions that affirmed our mutual value. As my actual 21st birthday approached, I decided to embrace celebration rather than avoid it. My friends organized a weekend trip to a nearby lake house. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully enjoy being the center of attention for a day, to believe I was worth the fuss they made over decorations, gifts, and my favorite foods. To medicine, Jasmine toasted at dinner, raising her glass. "Who taught us all that family is about who loves you well, not just who you're related to?" 1 week after my birthday, an unexpected package arrived at my dorm. The return address was my parents' house, Inside, I found several carefully wrapped items, old photo albums I hadn't known existed, childhood artwork and school projects my mother had saved, and a small wooden box containing mementos from my early years: hospital bracelets, a lock of hair, tiny shoes. At the bottom of the box were two separate envelopes, one from each parent. My mother's letter was longer, more emotional. She wrote about her struggle with postpartum depression, how disconnected she had felt from me in those crucial early months, and how that distance had never quite closed as I grew older. She acknowledged that the party business had become a way for her to create the perfect family moments she felt incapable of providing at home. "None of this excuses how we made you feel," she wrote toward the end. "I've been seeing a therapist since your visit, trying to understand how I failed you so completely. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I hear you now, even if I was deaf to your needs for so many years." My father's note was briefer, clearly difficult for him to write. His handwriting was uncharacteristically uneven, with several crossed-out false starts visible on the page. "I blamed you for something that wasn't your fault," he wrote. "The promotion wasn't guaranteed. My career might have taken the same path even without the complications of your birth. I made you carry the weight of my disappointments, and that was wrong. I'm trying to understand why I did that. I'm seeing someone too. It's not comfortable, but it's necessary." Neither letter contained a direct request for reconciliation, which I appreciated. Both ended with an acknowledgement that the next move, if any, was mine to make. I brought the letters to my next session with Dr. Thorne, trying to process my conflicted feelings. "I want to believe they're sincere," I admitted, "but I'm also skeptical about sudden change after so many years." "Both reactions are valid," she assured me. "People can change, but change takes time and consistent effort. It's reasonable to be cautious." After much consideration, I decided to send a brief email thanking them for the package and letters. I made no promises about the future of our relationship, but acknowledged their efforts toward understanding. 2 weeks later, my father called. Our conversation was awkward, stilted, but notably different from our previous interactions. He didn't deflect or become defensive when I expressed my ongoing feelings about childhood. Instead, he listened, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "My therapist suggested I practice just hearing you without immediately responding," he explained at one point. "It's harder than it sounds." This pattern continued: occasional phone calls, brief emails, small steps toward a different kind of relationship. My mother sent cards for no particular occasion, each containing a memory she had of me that wasn't tied to disappointment. My father forwarded articles about emotional neglect and its impacts, indicating he was educating himself about the harm that had been done. 3 months after receiving the package, they invited me to dinner at a restaurant halfway between campus and their home-neutral territory. I accepted with cautious curiosity. The dinner was a milestone and comfortable at times, but markedly different from our previous encounters. They had both prepared for the meeting, bringing notes from their respective therapy sessions about insights they'd gained. "We've closed the party business," my father announced toward the end of the meal. "Sold the equipment, referred our clients elsewhere." "Why?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "It represented too much of what went wrong," my mother explained. "Every time we discussed a booking, all I could think about was what you said, how we transformed our home for strangers but never for you." They presented me with a small, thoughtfully chosen gift, a first edition of a novel I had mentioned loving during one of our recent phone calls. The gesture was meaningful precisely because it showed they had been listening rather than just going through the motions. As I drove back to campus that evening, I reflected on the complexity of healing. My parents were genuinely trying to understand and make amends, but their efforts, while appreciated, couldn't erase 18 years of feeling unworthy of celebration. The wound was too deep, the patterns too established for a few months of change to completely transform our relationship. I realized then that forgiveness might be possible, but our relationship would never be what I had longed for as a child. It would be something new, something built on the ruins of what had come before, potentially valuable in its own way, but forever shaped by our shared history. And that was okay. I no longer needed them to be perfect parents. I just needed them to be honest about their imperfections and respectful of the boundaries I maintained for my own well-being. 5 years have passed since that turning point dinner with my parents. I'm 27 now, working as a child psychologist specializing in emotional neglect and familial trauma. The journey from wounded child to healing adult to professional helper has been neither straight nor simple, but it has been profoundly meaningful. After graduating, I continued therapy with Dr. Thorne while completing my master's degree. The work we did together helped me recognize that while my parents' failures had shaped my early beliefs about my own worth, I had the power to rewrite that narrative moving forward. One of the most healing practices I developed was creating new birthday traditions with my chosen family, rituals that celebrated not just my birth but my continued existence in the world. Each year, rather than expecting others to make the day special, I took agency in planning experiences that felt meaningful to me, inviting those I loved to join in the celebration. For my 25th birthday, my friends organized a surprise gathering at a rented garden venue. They had invited my parents as guests, not hosts. After checking with me first, when my parents arrived, they brought a small, simple gift, a folder containing documentation that the party business had officially been dissolved. The remaining funds donated to a children's charity that provides birthday celebrations for kids in foster care. It was a gesture that acknowledged our history without attempting to erase it, recognition that healing doesn't mean forgetting, but finding meaning in the pain and creating something better from it. My relationship with my parents today is cautious but genuine. They continue their individual therapy, and we've had several facilitated family sessions that helped establish healthier communication patterns. We will never have the easy, untroubled connection that some families enjoy. Too much happened or didn't happen during my formative years for that to be possible. But we have something that might be more valuable, a relationship based on truth rather than pretense. When old patterns emerge, my father's tendency to dismiss emotional concerns, my mother's inclination to smooth over conflict rather than address it, we now have tools to recognize and redirect those dynamics. The work I do now as a psychologist feels like turning poison into medicine. I specialize in helping children whose emotional needs have been neglected, children who, like me, were provided for physically while starving emotionally. I run support groups for young adults emerging from similar backgrounds, helping them recognize that their parents' limitations don't define their worth. I often share elements of my own story in these sessions, not as the definitive narrative but as one example of how childhood wounds can be addressed and, if not completely healed, at least integrated into a life of meaning and connection. The most important lesson I've learned through this journey is that healing isn't linear or complete. There are still days when I struggle with feeling inherently unworthy of celebration or attention. There are still birthdays when the child inside me mourns what I never received. The difference now is that I can recognize these feelings without being consumed by them. I've come to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean erasing harm or pretending it didn't matter. True forgiveness acknowledges the full reality of what happened while choosing not to be defined by it. I can recognize my parents as deeply flawed people who caused real damage while still allowing space for their humanity and their efforts toward change. Perhaps most importantly, I've broken the cycle. The patterns that shape my childhood won't be carried forward into new relationships. I've learned to recognize my own worth independent of external validation. I've developed the capacity to truly celebrate others without resentment or scorekeeping. And I've created a life centered on recognizing the inherent value in each person I encounter professionally and personally. As I look toward the future, I feel a sense of peace that once seemed impossible. The journey from that little girl watching birthday parties from her window to the woman I am today hasn't been easy, but it has been transformative. To those of you watching who might see elements of your own story in mine, please know this: you were always worthy of celebration, always. If the people who should have recognized that failed to do so, the failure was theirs, not yours, and it's never too late to begin honoring your own worth, even if others taught you to question it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? How have you learned to recognize your own worth? What birthday traditions do you cherish? Please like this video if my story resonated with you, subscribe to join our community of healing and growth, and share with someone who might need to hear they're worth celebrating. Thank you for being part of my journey, and remember, you deserve to take up space in this world. Your existence is worthy of acknowledgement today and every day.